Hey, you know, as the great philosopher Snoop once said, mock it like it's hot, mock it like it's hot. Wait, no, I definitely think it's drop it like it's hot. Whatever, let's roll with it. Here we go. Hey, Headliner Nation, what is going on? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios. And in this episode, we're going to be doing another redraft mock draft. This is not going to be best ball. We've been doing a ton of those because we're partnered with Draft.com. But for this one, we're just going to be speaking in terms of half-point PPR redraft leagues. I do want to make a couple of notes before we jump into this episode, though. A while back, I did a zero running back strategy for a mock draft, and ever since then, you've been asking about a zero wide receiver strategy. So I wanted to toss that one out as well. So that's what we're going to be doing during this mock. It's going to be a zero wide receiver strategy, but keep in mind, as we talk about this and as you see the draft board, a true zero wide receiver strategy or running back, whichever one you're going with, doesn't mean skipping the position for maybe 2 or 3 rounds. You're legitimately skipping that position for maybe 5 or 6 rounds. And in this episode, I do skip out on wide receiver until the 6th round. Keep in mind, this is not personally how I put a draft together. So if you want to mock me, if you want to mock my mock for how bad it is, don't do it, because on draft day, this isn't a strategy that I'm typically going to throw out there. I do like to go running back heavy. However, I'm not going to skip on a wide receiver for 5 rounds. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about why I pick some guys in certain positions. And overall, we're just going to give you a better feel for what a zero wide receiver strategy is going to look like. Now, before we get started, don't forget we are giving away a signed Alvin Kamara jersey right now. Make sure you buy a draft guide at thefantasyheadliners.com. Only $19.99 gets you almost 500 pages of pure fantasy football draft bliss. You buy one before August 15th, and you're going to be entered for a chance to win that signed jersey. Without further ado, let's jump into this zero wide receiver mock draft. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for this zero wide receiver mock draft, I'm going out of the 10th spot. A lot of you have asked about where do you pick guys if you're drafting, typically towards the back end of the first half. So that's what I'm going to be going with here. Half point, PPR, zero wide receiver. And we're going to take a look at the draft board now. And again, I just want you to keep in mind, a true zero wide receiver strategy, you're going to skip out on one for the first few rounds. And you've heard us talk about different things on this channel quite a bit, especially waiting on tight end and waiting on quarterback. But if you're going to implement a zero wide receiver strategy, typically you're going to take your tight end and your quarterback very early on. And that's what you're going to see here. Now, to begin the draft, I'm picking out of the 10 hole. You can see my name there, TFH Kyle. I did go with Dalvin Cook in the first round. Dalvin Cook is a first round talent for me. If he's healthy 14 to 16 games, he is a legit top 5 to 6 running back for me this year. Check out our other episodes where we've talked about Dalvin Cook. Jake has gone in depth on him. We've talked about him in our buy or sell ADP round videos. Dalvin Cook is a guy that I'm taking in the first round. I'm taking him over Joe Mixon because I've mentioned it before in other videos. I have concerns over his offensive line and their defense being extremely bad. Melvin Gordon, we have a holdout possible coming up right now. James Conner, I like him a little bit more than I did, but he's got some question marks. But I go Dalvin Cook in the first round because he's the one running back that I can get towards the back half of the first round, beginning of the second round, that has true dual threat, upside, catching the ball, running the ball, top 5 running back, all of those things combined. He's the one that I can get the best value for that offers me the most upside. Moving on to Nick Chubb, I take him in the second round. And again, if you've missed out on any of our videos, we've talked in depth about why Nick Chubb is a must-own for you this year. I even did a must-own video with Nick Chubb. I go really in-depth there on why you must own him. Check out that video when we're done here, and you'll understand why taking him in the second round is an amazing value. Down to round 3 now. Kerryon Johnson is who I go with here. Now, typically, I probably would have skipped out on Kerryon Johnson, and I may have went with a Stephon Diggs there instead. However, again, 0 wide receiver. We're tossing that position out the window right now and focusing on this. And with Kerryon Johnson, there's been a lot of positive news about him lately, about his use in that run game and passing game for Detroit. The running back coach recently said that there are no limits on Kerryon Johnson. We plan on using him to the fullest of his ability. Let's keep our fingers crossed. If that happens, this is a guy that's a legit running back 2 with that high running back 2 upside. Moving on, going with George Kittle here in the first round. And again, if I'm staying more balanced, and this is a draft that I'm actually doing to play in a league to be competitive, I probably go Stephon Diggs in the third. And then in the fourth, I probably go with a guy like Robert Woods or Brandon Cooks. One of those two. With that being said, though, again, we're skipping on that position right now. George Kittle's the guy that I go with because the top 2 tight ends are off the board. So I'm going to go with the number 3 tight end off the board. Now, if I were to go wide receiver here, I am going to stick with, and you've heard us talk about it a lot, O.J. Howard, Hunter Henry. Those are the guys that we're really keying on. And Evan Ingram, even Vance McDonald. Those are the guys that I really, really want. And you can see where they go here in these middle rounds. Only showing you 12 rounds here. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens after those 12 rounds, but only showing you those 12 rounds here. To round 5 now. Okay, our last time taking a position that isn't wide receiver before we go on a wide receiver run. Deshaun Watson is who I go with here at the end of the 5th round. Deshaun Watson is the only quarterback that was drafted within the top 5 quarterbacks last season that actually ended as a top 5 quarterback at the end of the year. They did a little bit of work on that offensive line. It's still not going to be great, but he offers us a ton of upside and a really good offense, can pick up some yards on the ground as well. The guy is excellent. He's a top 5 quarterback for me again. I decided to jump on him here because, again, we're skipping on that wide receiver position. Moving on, we're going to talk about the next 4 rounds collectively because this is where I go on my wide receiver run. And this is where you're going to start going on your wide receiver run as well if this is a strategy that you're implementing. Robbie Anderson is my first pick here. Now you're taking a look at it. I would have gone with Calvin Ridley here if Calvin Ridley would have been available, but he was not. So Robbie Anderson goes there, and you do see a guy like Tyler Boyd, Jarvis Landry go after him. Alshon Jeffrey, I'm not high on him this season, so I wasn't even considering him. But you might be asking, Kyle, why are you going Robbie Anderson over Tyler Boyd and Jarvis Landry? Don't get me wrong. I like Tyler Boyd. I like Jarvis Landry. However, Robbie Anderson is for sure the number 1 wide receiver on his team. Tyler Boyd has A.J. Green. Jarvis Landry has Odell Beckham Jr. Obviously, they could have injuries that could thrust those guys up into that wide receiver 1 category for their team. But Robbie Anderson at this point in the draft is the one guy I can take and say, you know what? This is for sure a guy that will be the wide receiver 1 on his team. It's also the wide receiver 1 on a team that could potentially see some more deep balls and a lot more open field and deep space because they've got a guy like Jamison Crowder now that can fit underneath in the middle of those linebackers, just scoot in behind those linebackers, so they need to keep their attention there. Safeties need to keep their attention on him. And then also a guy like Le'Veon Bell that's going to command those targets underneath. So with all that being said, that could definitely open up the field, down the field for some stretch plays there. Robbie Anderson is a guy that fits that profile to give me those big-time touchdowns. Dante Pettis coming number 2 here for my wide receivers. Again, another guy. Now, no guarantee he will be the wide receiver 1 on his team, but as of right now, it appears that that is what he is going to be. He had a great end to last season, so again, I'm going with a guy that, yes, 100%, Dante Pettis, I believe, could be or will at least start the season as the wide receiver 1 on his team. Guys going after that. Allen Robinson? Nope, because we're going to talk about someone else on that team here in a few minutes. Sammy Watkins, obviously with Tyreek Hill being 100% ready to roll now for this season, Sammy Watkins goes out the window a little bit as well. So we're going to go with Dante Pettis there. After that, Christian Kirk. I like Christian Kirk this year. I think he's a tremendous value in this 7, 8, 9 range of area. Will he be the wide receiver 1 on his team? I'm going to stay away from that prediction a little bit. Larry Fitz, with him being there, he's the guy. I'm going to stick with Christian Kirk for right now, though, for a few different reasons. And I do take him over Larry Fitzgerald, as you can see. However, I believe Christian Kirk, I think, might be a little bit more apt for those maybe big time touchdowns. Larry Fitzgerald playing out of the slot, I think he's going to get a lot of looks this year, but I think Christian Kirk could be a guy that gets a little bit more of those deep targets for this team. I like his value there. I do go with him over Larry Fitzgerald, but honestly, if you went him or Larry Fitzgerald, no problem there. I'm not going with Will Fuller though. Dude's always hurt. Not interested in dealing with that. I'm going to go with Christian Kirk instead. Kiki QT coming in at round 9. This is half PPR. QT is a guy that if Will Fuller were to go down with another injury, QT is definitely the wide receiver 2 on that team. However, I do believe that he's a guy that will out-target and out-catch Will Fuller this year. Will Fuller will have more touchdowns, but QT is going to be the guy that in any type of half PPR or PPR format, I would much rather take at his current draft slot because I do expect big things from him out of the slot. Plus, I get to stack him with my quarterback, Deshaun Watson. Always good in these type of scenarios. Moving on, round 10, going with Damian Harris, so I get back to running back here to establish some of that depth. And Damian Harris is a guy that is talked about a lot right now. Sony Michel is going on the PUP list to begin the year, so he is, not to begin the year, to begin training camp. He could come off at any time, but it is still concerning. They've talked about Damian Harris as being a guy that can play out of the slot a little bit, move him around and do a lot of things with him. I urge all of you, though, that are running to draft Damian Harris, also try and get Rex Burkhead a little bit later than that as well. Rex Burkhead hasn't jumped really onto the radar too much at this point, but you have to keep in mind that he is still there, and they have utilized him when he has been healthy. So, if you're taking Damian Harris because you're worried about Sony Michel, I'm also taking Rex Burkhead later to go along with him. Anthony Miller in round 11, I tell you what, super high on Anthony Miller this year, 100%. You need to try and get him, especially at this draft value. I've already told you in one of the videos I just did in post-hype breakouts, or post-hype sleepers, as we like to call them. A guy that was really hyped last year, had a lot of injury issues, and still played fairly well. Go check out that video, post-hype sleepers. I just did that a few days ago. Go look at that, and I'm going to give you some more in-depth on Anthony Miller and why you need to own him this year. In round 12, now, if you were one of the people that were concerned about Dalvin Cook going in round 1, well, I handcuff him here. I get Alexander Mattison in round 12. So if Dalvin Cook goes down, I don't completely lose all of that value because I have his backup. And is Alexander Mattison Dalvin Cook? Absolutely not. Not in any way, shape, or form. But at least I know if Dalvin Cook goes down, I have an emergency option to go with. So then I don't have to scramble on the waiver wire and try to grab another running back that might not be doing anything. At this point, I get a definite starter that I can roll with. Another question that we've been getting a lot about on this channel, Jake and I have said it quite a few times, we don't like to draft kickers and we don't like to draft defense. So, you've been asking us though, Kyle, what would you do at the end of a draft? Where would you take some defenses or kickers? I'll tell you what, right now, I would rather spend a decent pick on a defense or special teams before I would spend one on a kicker. Kickers can fluctuate a lot. One guy that you draft might not be nearly as good because his offense doesn't play that well, and a guy that you throw out the door might end up being on a little bit better offense that year. So I would definitely, again, I'm not really going with kickers, but we'll talk about them a little bit here. You can see that the earliest defense goes here in the 9th round. The Chicago Bears defense comes off the board. Now, if you are somebody that really wants a defense and you want a defense early on, then I would direct you to wait a little bit longer and wait till 12 or 13 because, as you can see here, Cleveland's defense went off in round 12. The two defenses that I am targeting heavy this year, if I'm going to draft one, is the Cleveland defense and the Dallas defense. And Dallas actually went in round 13 in this mock. Again, it is cut off there at the bottom just because I didn't want to... First off, it didn't all fit, and I wanted you to see the entire board at one time so you could see where other players went as well instead of having to cut things and move them around. So I did cut off a couple of rounds at the end. However, again, talking about them a little bit, those are the two defenses that I'll target at the end of basically any draft if you're someone that still feels like, hey, I need to have a defense at the end of the draft. For kickers, though, no kickers went in this mock draft until basically the very last round. That's the one thing I would recommend you do. Again, in the later rounds, target some handcuff running backs like an Alexander Madison. If you're somebody that drafts Leonard Fournette this year, target Alfred Blue. We've talked about Raquel Armstead quite a bit on this channel as well. However, he's going on the PUP to begin the season, so we're not going to have him right away. So Alfred Blue is the next target there that I'm going for. Handcuff some running backs. Take some young running backs that could end up jumping out. Take some PPR type backs like a Nyheim Hines. That might be a guy that you try to grab a little bit later on as well. Take some flyers, some guys that you say, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, I toss them. I'll pick up a defense later. So again, this entire strategy is based around 0 wide receiver. And to do that, you're waiting until basically about the 6th round to start taking those wide receivers. Now, would you feel comfortable with this team? Maybe you do. Do I feel comfortable with this team? Absolutely not. This is not a team that I would want to own. It's just how the chips fell. Out of the several mock drafts that I did for this video, though, this was the one where I said, you know what? I think this is the best strategy, the best one that I can use to kind of show what you're going to do in a 0 wide receiver type format. I don't love it, though. I don't mind starting out running back heavy, but again, in those rounds where I specifically mentioned a guy like Stephon Diggs, or then going with like a Brandon Cooks, like if I were to do that to begin the game and then get an OJ Howard and Evan Ingram, Vance McDonald, something like that, Hunter Henry, then I'm a lot more happy with this draft, and I'm much more excited about where it's headed. This for me though, this isn't great. But you tell us, what do you think? What do you think about this draft? Is this a team that you would like, or do you think that staying a little bit more balanced at the beginning of your draft is what you need to do? As always, hit me up on Twitter at krich1532. Run out there and buy that draft guide, thefantasyheadliners.com. Only $19.99. Don't forget about that. Hit that like button, but more importantly, if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. And if you do, let us know in the comments because I want to personally welcome you. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Fantasy Headliners, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, everyone.